Welcome to San Francisco. My name is Morrie Ruffin. I'm the Managing Director of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. I'm delighted to have all of you here today, and I want to congratulate you for actually being able to make it here. I know a lot of people are probably still stranded along the way. So I think this is a great indication of the excitement in our sector that we have such a great crowd here this morning. This is the 7th year we've done the State of the Industry briefing. And it's grown significantly in size. I remember the first year we did this, it was in a smaller room around the corner that fit about 30 people. So we're making progress in terms of the size and interest in this sector. So I'm just going to address a couple of items here as we get started. First of all, just a couple of notes about the Alliance, and you're going to hear Michael Werner talk a little bit about our work in Washington, our policy work. But just as a reminder, our mission, the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, seeks to foster research, development, investment, commercialization, ultimately for the purpose of delivering transformative medicine to patients. So that's really what this is all about. And we have really 3 key focus areas. We like to add, we say, and this is something we repeat often, that we advocate for clear, predictable, and harmonized regulatory and review pathways. We enable market access for value-based medicine, favorable reimbursement policies, and then obviously a common theme in this meeting and why we're here this week, access to capital, obviously very important for all of our companies. And for the briefing today, one of the things I wanted to talk about just is our effort to understand the scope of what we're doing on a global scale. And we have, as many of you know, a partnership with Informa. They're the host of the Biotech Showcase with EBD. We've been working with them for about the last 2 or 3 years. And it's really with them and their efforts that we've been able to, I think, more effectively track the performance of the sector. So much of the information you will hear today, and that delivered by our chairman, Bob Preti, builds on that partnership. And so this is the industry as we see it globally. Obviously, these numbers are constantly changing, but we're tracking it very carefully. So a lot of the data that you see today will build off of this work and this partnership. And so for the balance of the State of the Industry briefing, what we will cover is the policy environment. As I mentioned, Michael's going to address that next. Then Bob Preti will talk about the clinical progress and then anticipated clinical events for 2017. And then finally, we'll go over the financial performance of the sector and talk about deal making both last year and this year. So with that, I'm going to welcome Michael to the stage to discuss all of our work in the policy arena. Michael?
Okay. Thanks, Morrie. I'll join in welcoming everybody here today. We're thrilled to have you and are excited to present the information we're going to be presenting. I'm Michael Werner. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Alliance. I know many of you. I focus on our activities in Washington, and I just wanted to talk for a minute about that this morning. So what's really significant, you're going to hear a lot about what's changed over the last several years in this space. And what's significant is that ARM has grown with the success of the industry. So now we're in a situation where the Alliance really is the major thought player in the policy environment. Whether we're talking about FDA, whether we're talking about Congress, whether we're talking about the administration, the previous administration, the new administration, or CMS, we've really become the place that they turn to when they have questions about this sector and want to develop policy surrounding this sector. We know I'm not going to go through all this, obviously, but it's just an indication of just some of the issues that are confronting us as we start a new year, and of course all the changes in Washington. All the issues around the FDA approval process, the issues about reimbursement continue to be difficult and salient for the space. International regulatory issues, Japan, the EU, Korea, all developing regulatory pathways, and we operate in a global environment, so how do we make sure all of those things are consistent. And we saw the results of ARM's leadership with the recent passage of the 21st Century Cure Act in Washington. There it is. So again, I'm not going to go through this point by point, but what I really want to highlight for all of you is this was a major victory for ARM and a major victory for this sector. We were able to, because of the way this sector has grown, because of the work of a lot of people in this room, I mentioned that ARM is now the hub of the wheel. We are now the people that, the thought leaders that policymakers come to. And as a result, we were able to influence policy on the regulatory side. So we were able to take this legislative proposal and develop a proposal that optimizes the regulatory approval pathway for regenerative medicine products. And we were able to do it in a way that protects FDA's the gold standard, that protects FDA's standards of approval. So it doesn't mean that unsafe products will get to the market. It means that safe and effective products will get to the market, and they'll get to the market more quickly. And I'm happy to go into more detail with anybody after this session or while you're here this week, and also talk about all of the issues that we're going to be dealing with this year on the regulatory side, on the reimbursement side, and elsewhere. Also, I'd like to just point out we're going to have a webinar the first week of February where we'll walk through all of these provisions and their impact on the sector. We are likely to be joined by FDA leadership, who has been very supportive of all of this as well. So please be on the lookout. You'll get an email invitation for that. So as I said, I'm available for if anybody has any questions or wants more information, but it's going to be a busy year ahead. And please participate. If you're a member of ARM, join our Government Relations Committee, our Regulatory Committee, our Reimbursement Committee. We really are the ones who are at the table making it happen. And now to present the rest of the data that we want to talk about today about the industry, I'm pleased to introduce the chairman of our board and the president of PCT, Dr. Bob Preti. Bob.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning and welcome to the State of the Industry Briefing 2017. Before I get started, I would like to thank Michael and point out the work that Michael did on the 21st Century Cures Act in pushing that through, and particularly in getting the language on regenerative medicine advanced therapies into that document. Not only was that an incredibly important moment for ARM and for the industry and for the patients that we serve, but at the end of the day, it's an example of what it is to be a member of the Alliance and how important it is. Michael spoke with you about if you want to reach out to him and talk to him if you're a member. I'd like to add on to that, that if you're not a member and you're a member company or institution, potential member company or institution, please reach out to any one of the staff today, or any one of us, and join. You'll see over the next couple of minutes as I go through about 15 minutes of description about where the industry is and what we expect to happen this year and into next year. We're at a very important place right now in the industry. We're at an inflection point, and I've seen a number of these over the years that I've been involved in this industry. We're at a tremendously exciting inflection point, and we need a lot of help to guide this and put it in the right place. None of this happens by accident. So I'd like to thank Michael and Morrie and the staff and all those at Alliance leadership for the great work that they do, and maybe just take a minute to a round of applause for them. Thank you. So, we have a robust clinical pipeline in the industry, and it's continuing to grow. What this slide shows is that there's a tremendous increase, a 21% increase over 2015 in the number of trials. And part of what's happening here is the addition of trials of new companies that have been in the space adding trials and also adding in investigator-sponsored trials. So let's just look at the numbers in phase 1 and phase 2 and the tremendous growth. And what's really important here is that there are 66 phase 3 trials, and a good number of those phase 2 trials are companies that are in pivotal trials. They're pivotal trials, and they're looking for accelerated approvals. So what does that mean? Well, currently we've got a handful of approved products around the world. and we'll talk a little bit about some of those in the next couple of minutes. But what this slide essentially says is that we have a tremendously exciting near-term future with 66 phase 3 trials and a number of pivotal trials in phase 2 that may actually even outpace those that are in phase 3. And the activity continues to be predominantly in the oncology space, with approximately 45% of the trials in oncology. And right behind that are the cardiovascular trials, about 11%, and there's a good number of neurodegenerative trials as well. What's also important to note about the activity is that a number of these categories also include trials that are focused on rare genetic disorders. So there are a number of therapeutic platforms and enabling technologies that are behind all of that clinical activity. And what's interesting about this, as I look at it, is that the industry really started as basic cell therapy, if you will, and none of that's going away. The basic cell therapy trials are still there. There's still a tremendous amount of growth in cell therapy, but we're learning as we go about ways to refine, ways to change, and ways to impact a larger number of diseases using different platforms. So from advanced cells, T cells and hematopoietic stem cells, an iPS cell and MSC, for instance, we've moved into the cell-based immunotherapies, which of course has caused a tremendous amount. It's resulted in a tremendous amount of activity and interest in this space due to the incredible clinical efficacy that's being shown. And then we move into novel and synthetic gene delivery technologies, which can either be used with cells or without cells, including adeno-associated virus, lentivirals, retroviruses, and adenoviruses, and the gene editing technologies. So the next level of non-viral-based ways, using molecular scissors, if you will, to cause these genetic changes in the cells. And then follow on to that, we're looking forward to next-gen gene expression constructs, such as novel capsids and inducible elements and the like. So the pipeline is robust, and the technologies and platforms supporting that is even more robust. And what else is happening here? This is particularly interesting and very close to my professional heart, is the technologies that are fueling the growth from underneath. And one of the things that's happening now is that the clinical activity has advanced so quickly and has accelerated so fast that we from the CMC side find ourselves playing catch-up. But this is a bellwether of where we are in the industry right now. We're at a point where we really have to get very serious about large-scale commercial production, because these products will get into the clinic. And now delivery of them and industrialization has become a major topic, from engineering and automated solutions to reduce cost and increase scalability and sustainability, to novel tools for genetic engineering and direct clinical development and manufacturing capacity, business models, taking a look at past successes and past failures and saying, what could business models do to help this? And so many companies are entering into these relationships now to ensure that they have robust and long-term clinical supply. And then groups such as the Alliance and others are working on standardization and commoditization of manufacturing and global harmonization of the regulatory requirements, so that a company can get an approval in one market and have it approved almost automatically in the others. And the federal government is involved as well. There are major funding initiatives ongoing through Commerce and the Department of Defense to support the regenerative medicine advanced therapies industry by supporting manufacturing build-out. This is an example of just one of the sectors. It's the gene-modified cell therapy and genome editing sectors, and it is a smattering of the major companies that are active in the space. There are others. This is not an exhaustive list. But just 4 or 5 years ago, this list might have been about 20 or 25% of these companies. And you can see here the major AAV companies, the lenti and retroviral vector companies, the adenoviral vector companies, genome editing, and then, again, the enabling platforms that are supporting the clinical activity. So there continues to be clinical progress across the entire gene and cell therapy space. And highlighted in green are 3 products that received regulatory approval last year. So if you go back to the first slide that I showed, about 66 products that are in phase 3, and a number of products in phase 2 that may even outpace those into the clinic. Think about what's about to happen. It's the inflection point that we all know that we're involved in right now. Strimvelis received EMA approval in Europe. Temcel launched in Japan, and the FDA approved MACI in the United States. Now, Spark Therapeutics and Kite are right behind this with very exciting phase 3 data, and Kite has already begun its BLA submission, and we'll talk about 2017 in a minute, but very exciting milestones that have been hit in 2016. We're anticipating a large number of data events in 2017 that will continue to drive the momentum in the sector. Again, this list is not meant to be exhaustive, but they represent major events in the industry. And what I find particularly interesting about this list is that this time next year, we will have up to 6 complete filings of BLA or market authorization around the world. So we'll have answers on some of those. So we'll be in a very different position next year at this time with a much more crisp view of what's working, what's not, and what's the next step behind the industry. Now, this is a second slide showing the large number of clinical data events. And we put this up because last year we fit all of this onto one slide. And now there are 2 slides that show that there are a number of companies pressing towards those very important clinical milestones that inform the approaches we take and will continue to drive interest from corporate partners and the like. And there is continued activity in corporate partnering. There's a significant number of dollars that have been poured into the space, and there are deals that are noteworthy in terms of their size, their long-term size of over $2 billion deals, such as Baxalta, Pfizer, and Biogen. But what's very important here, too, is that these are not just milestone dollars. There are significant upfront payments in the range of $100 to $150 million in some cases in upfront payments, showing a very strong interest from our corporate partners. Many people thought that the IPO window was essentially closed in 2016, and indeed, in some sectors, it was. But in this industry, we saw demand for companies. A number of companies were able to go public in 2016, 9 of them to be exact, and several raised money beyond their targets. Now, 2016, we are in a real world, was not as strong as 2015. But in 2015, we did see what we think was an outlier in a number of different ways. The fact is, for us, there was still a tremendous amount of money flowing into the space. $5.3 billion in what you could say was a down year is really not a bad result and nothing to be embarrassed about. That is about 50% of the 2016 dollars that were raised in cell and gene therapy. Continued financing demonstrates our confidence in the growth potential sector. A lot of milestones and concerns that were keeping investors out of the sector previously have been addressed, such as pathways to commercialization, clinical efficacy, as demonstrated, as I mentioned, by the recent gene therapy trials. And what's important about this is that VC financing is strong. 4 or 5 years ago, you could not interest VC in the space at all. And now we're seeing significant funding, such as the Series A round in both gene and cell therapy. Versant funding of Blue Rock Therapeutics last year is a good example of that, $225 million. And so by a number of measures, if you look at what happened over the last 3 years, we could say that with 2016 being out in the lead as perhaps an outlier, 2016 was a strong year, outpacing 2014 in many of the key indicators. There are a number of examples of key deals with large upfront payments, as we mentioned, and the major IPOs. And how is the sector performing, the public sector? Well, the NASDAQ index itself, identified here right in the middle as a light green line performed at about 107% of, as it did at the opening, closed at about 108% of the opening. And what's important about this is the companies that went public this year, as indicated by the orange, clearly outpaced. And these are RMAT companies. These are the 9 companies that we mentioned on one of the slides earlier, clearly outpaced the market, ending up 124% of where they started out. And the gene therapy average itself, although it tracked with the market, outpaced the market, ending up at 85% of where it started, beating the NASDAQ Biotech Index by about 6%. So there's a tremendous amount of momentum in the sector. And with that excitement behind us about the future of these novel technologies and their potential to address the unmet medical needs, we're in a position like we've never been before. ARM is well positioned to continue its thought leadership and to guide the regulatory environment, the reimbursement environment, and the capital formation environment. And we continue to invite you to be active in the alliance and to join if you've not joined. Thank you for your attention.